There is a place in America where the soil is so rich it looks almost black. Where cotton once grew so thick it turned entire landscapes white every harvest season. Where the music that became rock and roll was born in wooden shacks with dirt floors. This place fed America for 200 years. It made some of the wealthiest people in the country astronomically rich, and today it is one of the most abandoned regions in the entire United States, the Mississippi Delta. And the story of why people stopped living here is one of the most important and most ignored stories in American history. First, something most people get wrong. The Mississippi Delta is not where the Mississippi River meets the ocean. That is 500 miles to the south. The Mississippi Delta is a flat alluvial plain in the northwest corner of Mississippi. It sits between two rivers, the Mississippi on the west, the Yazoo on the east. It stretches roughly 200 miles long and 80 miles wide. For thousands of years, those two rivers flooded every spring. They deposited layer after layer of some of the richest topsoil on Earth. By the time European settlers arrived, the Delta had soil so deep and so fertile that almost anything planted in it would grow. That fertility was not a blessing for everyone. For a long time, it was the opposite. The Delta was not settled quickly. It was swampy, heavily forested, full of mosquitoes and disease. But by the early 1800s, plantation owners understood what that black soil meant. They forced enslaved people to drain the swamps, clear the forests, build the levees, transform raw wilderness into the most productive cotton-growing land in the world. By the time of the Civil War, the Mississippi Delta was producing more wealth per square mile than almost any region in the United States. That wealth went to a very small number of white plantation owners. The people who actually built the Delta with their labor owned none of it. After the Civil War, the plantation system did not end in the Delta. It transformed. Sharecropping replaced slavery in name. In practice, the system kept black families tied to the same land under contracts designed to ensure they could never get ahead. A sharecropper would work a portion of a plantation. At the end of the year, after the landowner took his cut and deducted expenses, most sharecroppers ended the year in debt rather than profit. It was not freedom, it was a different kind of trap. Here's one of the most remarkable facts about the Mississippi Delta. The music that became the foundation of almost all modern American music was created right here, in these fields, in these shacks, on these dirt roads. The blues was born in the Mississippi Delta. Charlie Patton, one of the earliest recorded blues artists, worked and performed on Dockery Farms in Sunflower County. That single plantation influenced more musicians than almost any other location in American music history. Son House recorded some of the most haunting music ever put to tape right here. Robert Johnson, whose recordings from the 1930s still sound unlike anything else ever made, lived and died in the Delta. Muddy Waters grew up picking cotton in Issaquah County before moving north and transforming Delta blues into Chicago blues. B.B. King was born in Birthplace, Mississippi. He picked cotton as a child on a Delta plantation. Every one of these artists came from poverty so deep it is hard to comprehend. They created something extraordinary from almost nothing. And then most of them left, because the Delta was no place to build a life if you had any other option. Between 1910 and 1970, approximately 6 million Black Americans left the South. It is called the Great Migration. And the Mississippi Delta was one of its primary sources. They went to Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, New York. They went because the sharecropping system offered no future, because racial violence in the Delta was brutal and constant, because northern factories were paying wages that a Delta sharecropper could not imagine earning in a lifetime. They went by train, following the Illinois Central Railroad north from the Delta to Chicago. That train route became one of the most significant migration corridors in American history. When Muddy Waters arrived in Chicago in 1943, he brought Delta blues with him. So did tens of thousands of others. The music that came out of that migration became Chicago blues. Chicago blues became rock and roll became everything. The Great Migration did not just empty the Delta, it built the cultural foundation of modern American music, art, and literature. It created the Chicago that exists today. It changed America, but it left the Delta behind. If the Great Migration was the first blow to the Delta's population, the mechanical cotton picker was the second. For most of American history, harvesting cotton required enormous amounts of human labor. It was back-breaking work, and it required enough workers that even a struggling sharecropping system could sustain large populations across the Delta. In 1944, the first successful mechanical cotton harvester was demonstrated on a plantation in Clarksdale, Mississippi. Within 2 decades, machines were doing the work of hundreds of people on every farm. Planters no longer needed sharecroppers. They no longer needed the labor force that had worked their land for generations. Families who had lived on the same plantation land for 3 and 4 generations were told to leave. The ones who had not already left during the Great Migration now had no choice. Towns that had existed to serve the agricultural workforce began to hollow out. Schools closed, businesses shut down, churches emptied. The population of the Delta has been falling ever since, and it has never stopped. Drive through the Mississippi Delta today and you will see something that does not look like the rest of America. Miles and miles of flat farmland, still some of the most productive in the world, still growing cotton and soybeans and corn, but almost nobody is working it. Modern agriculture requires almost no human labor. Then you hit a town. Clarksdale is one of the most famous towns in the Delta. It sits at the intersection of highways 61 and 49. That crossroads is where the blues legend of Robert Johnson selling his soul to the devil supposedly took place. Clarksdale had over 21,000 people in 1950. Today, the population is around 15,000 and still falling. The downtown has empty storefronts that have been empty for decades. Buildings that were once banks and department stores stand with broken windows and caved-in roofs. Greenville was the largest city in Mississippi outside of Jackson for much of the 20th century. Today, its population has dropped by more than 40% from its peak. Across the Delta, the story is the same. The numbers go in one direction only. The people who remained in the Delta are facing conditions that are genuinely shocking for a region inside the United States. Several Delta counties have poverty rates above 30%, some approach 40%. They rank consistently at or near the bottom of every national measure of health, education, and economic opportunity. The Delta has some of the highest rates of diabetes in the country, heart disease, hypertension. Life expectancy in parts of the Delta is closer to that of a developing nation than the American average. Food deserts are severe across the region. There are counties in the Delta where the nearest grocery store is more than 30 miles away. Hospital closures have hit the Delta harder than almost anywhere in America. Rural hospitals that served communities for decades have shut down one by one. People are driving an hour or more for basic medical care. The internet infrastructure that the rest of America takes for granted barely exists in much of the Delta. The same soil that generated enormous wealth for plantation owners for 2 centuries has left almost nothing for the people who actually built and worked it. Here is where the story gets complicated, because the Delta is not finished. Clarksdale has become a destination for blues tourism. The Delta Blues Museum draws visitors from around the world. Musicians still come to Clarksdale not just to see where it all started, but to play in the juke joints that have survived. Ground Zero Blues Club has kept live Delta blues alive in a town that history tried to empty. Mound Bayou is one of the oldest all-black towns in America. It was founded in 1887 by formerly enslaved people who wanted to build something entirely their own. It still exists, still fighting. A small number of farmers across the Delta have shifted to specialty crops, agritourism, and direct-to-consumer models that are starting to create economic models that actually benefit local communities rather than extracting wealth from them. The Delta National Forest, the Mississippi Delta National Heritage Area. Conservation efforts are beginning to recognize that the natural landscape of the Delta is itself worth preserving, and the music never left. Every year, the Sunflower River Blues and Gospel Festival brings thousands of people to Clarksdale to hear music that started in fields within a few miles of the stage. Subscribe to this channel, because there are places like this all across America, and most of them are not on any map you have ever been shown.